Hey folks, how you going? Good. When I first came here in April, I just started writing a book, and I got it finished about a few weeks back and got it published. So I got a few with me, $25. It's called High Vis Faith. So basically the stuff I've been talking about over the last few months I've been here is in here, as well as some other stuff, thinking around how we live our faith out in the workplace. You'll recognise some of the stories if you read the book. And here's the deal, it's $25. If you find a spelling error, email it to me and I'll send you $25 right back to you. One way of editing. Because I found that as much as I edit a lot, there's still stuff that slips through. This is a book I wrote before that one too, called The Future is Bivocational. So that one's there as well if you're interested. Shortlisted for Australian Christian Book of the Year. Came second, equal second with 9 others, but still second. When my daughter was about 6 years old, we were away on holidays down in Denmark and we're sitting around the kitchen table and she'd had her first year of primary school. And she says around the table one night, she says, "I know some swear words." Yeah, we thought that. Okay. What swear words do you know, Ellie? "I can't tell you. I can't say them." We said, "Well, go on, maybe just tell us one. What words are?" She said, "Well, there's the but word, there's the shit word, and there's the foot word." Okay. So we just said, "Tell us one." She said, "I can't say them, I'll get in trouble." We said, "Yes, you can." So Danelle said, "What about the shit word? Is it the word you're thinking of?" And she says, "No." Like she'd never heard that word before. She's a great parenting moment, Danelle. I said, "Well, why don't you tell us what it is, honey? You won't get in trouble." She says, "Okay, shut up." "Hope you don't say that." She said, "No, I don't say that, Dad." "What about the but word?" I think she realised she could tell us. She said, "Bum." I said, "Okay, hope you don't use that word either, honey." And the foot word I might have been partially responsible for. You know what that one was? Fart. Might have learnt that from me. We sent our daughter to school to learn some things, and she learnt other things just because of the environment she was in and the people she hung around and the world she was part of. She learnt other things. As we talk about work, and as we're going to talk this morning about rest, one of the things we need to come to grips with is that we learn a lot from the world we're part of. We come to church for maybe an hour or 2 hours a week. We maybe go to Bible study. We're maybe in that space for 4 hours of the week, and the rest of the time we're in our world, on the internet, being discipled by algorithms, being discipled by all sorts of things that we often aren't even aware of, so that we're being formed. And those things don't form us into the image of Christ. So our challenge is to continually reflect on what we are learning and to align it with Scripture and to ask, okay, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. How does this line up with what God's Word says? This morning we're going to talk about this thing called Sabbath. Now, if Sabbath trips you up, because it used to trip me up, it was a word that was associated with all sorts of things back in the day. Anyone remember, anyone as old as me or older that can kind of go, I remember Sabbath. Sabbath was the day you weren't allowed to what? Go shopping? What was that? Read the paper. Yep, that's pretty bad. Play sport. Do the washing. Well, that's pretty good, eh? That's a win. I just remember Sabbath as being kind of a day for no smiling. Wear slacks, yep, thank you. I'm seeing the older people really participating here because you've had this experience. You know, Sabbath was the day of not doing things. I met a girl once who told me she didn't kiss on the Sabbath. Maybe that's just me. But Sabbath got a pretty bad name. So if as we talk about Sabbath, what Sabbath actually means is stop. rest. So if the word trips you up, just put aside Sabbath and think rest. Think stop. Now, I live just a normal working life these days, so when the weekend comes around, it's like, oh, the weekend. I love the weekend because I can stop and I can just chill out. Some of you know that feeling. So we've been talking about, if you haven't been here, I've been here 3 times now, and this is the 4th time, talking about work and where it fits in our lives. We said it's a good part of God's world. Work is something God's given us, whether it's paid or whether it's unpaid, whatever you're doing that serves the world, that is part of your purpose, it's good, all right? We talked about having a vocation, having a calling. We talked about living out our faith in the workplace. So this morning is about Sabbath. Some of us just love work. I mean, some of us can get so caught up with work that, that new project, that when you get some praise from the boss, when things go right, when you make a bit more money, it just feeds something inside you that makes you go, oh, I want to do this more. And work can get quite addictive. It's quite a challenge. I'm sure you've felt it. There is always something to aspire to keep working. A pastor friend of mine, his son came to him one day and he said, hey, Dad, pretty brutal. He said, hey, Dad, all my mates have lots of really good toys. They go on really good holidays. Their dads work FIFO. Almost like, could you lift your game? Could you go and get a job and go and earn some real money for us? So Dad says, well, mate, you realise if I go and work away, I won't be around for, your assemblies. I won't be able to come to your football and, we won't see you at dinner time, all those sort of things. He sort of spelled out why it wasn't such a good idea. And he says, you get that? And he goes, yeah, I get it, Dad. He says, so can we send Mum? It's part of us. We've learnt some ways to live that aren't Jesus' way, but that feel good for a time. So I want to encourage you to keep wrestling with what work looks like in your life, because it can dominate your life and it shouldn't. It's a part of your life, and where rest comes into your life. If we open up the Bible, we're going to take a look at God's idea of Sabbath and what rest looked like. And it starts in Genesis, right back at the very, very start. Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. It says, on the 7th day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy. God takes a break. I don't think God was tired, but he took a break and he said, this is a holy day, this is a special day. Rest matters. A 6-to-1 ratio working week was built into the order of creation. Again, remember this is before sin. So this is God's original plan. Rest is part of a good world, not a concession to a broken world where we get tired. We need to rest and recoup. But as you can imagine now, rest is also tainted by sin. So for some of us, we struggle to rest. We feel guilty when we rest, or we've got the phone nearby just in case someone wants to call and place an order. The next reference to rest is in the 10 Commandments. And this comes after the Hebrew people have come out of Egypt. And it's a call to remember the 7th day. Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11 says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord. On it you can't work, not your son, your daughter, your male, your female servant, not your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all, and rested on the 7th. So no one in your entire community, not even your animals, are allowed to work on the Sabbath, God says. Can you imagine that today? I don't know that this world would sustain that type of existence. We need nurses and we need ambos and we need people who are going to do things at other times on the Sabbath. So God says, remember, because these are people who've been in slavery for a long, long time, and they've probably forgotten that this was part of their identity. When you're a slave, Pharaoh doesn't say, hey, you've been working hard, have a day off. In fact, take one every week. He doesn't do that. So they're probably gone from their identity. So they're called to remember. But the next time we see Sabbath, it comes up in Deuteronomy. It it says, it's after the Ten Commandments, it's with the language of observe. It says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. So it's now part of your rhythm, so now observe it. Keep it as part of your rhythm. What exactly do we mean by Sabbath? Well, back then, it was technically a 24-hour period, starting at sundown one evening, finishing at sundown the next, where you down tools and you didn't do anything. So you prepared your meals the day before, you actually had a whole day where you didn't work. And I'll bet some of you are sitting there thinking, that sounds awesome. You can still do that, you know? You can still do it. You can still choose not to work for a whole day. Now, there's debate around where Sabbath fits into the Christian expression of faith today, because obviously we are not living in Hebrew times. And there's debate around how it looks. Some people go, oh, look, I really feel the need to set aside a really concrete 24-hour period where I rest and where I practice some things and where we set it aside to God. That's what we do. And other people say, well, you know, it's kind of more of a rhythm. I need to find a way to live that is work, rest, and it's not one day, but it's a way of life. You might want to think about which one works for you and which one you practice. You know, if you like the more 24-hour basis type thing, there's a guy called John Mark Comer who does a fair bit of teaching around this, and his stuff on practicing the way in a book called Garden City, that will get you up to speed on that. But the other way says we're not bound by the law anymore. So how do we approach it? Paul says in Romans 14, 5-6, one person considers one day more sacred than another, another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in his own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, and they give thanks to God. And he goes on. He's talking about the way in which we respect different practices. So today, Sean's working. He's here on the Sabbath. Is that a sin? Well, you'd probably think not, because you're paying him to do it. All right? So, or you're enabling him to sin. That doesn't make sense, does it? So obviously pastors can't have a Sabbath like maybe other people would. So Sean's got a day off during the week. It's Friday. Is that right, Sean? Yeah. And Saturday probably as well. So you need two. Good to have them back to back. What Paul is saying, you're free to choose. You're free to do things differently from what God prescribed back in the Old Testament. On a theological note, you can practice your 24-hour Sabbath if you want. You can have a rhythm that works for you. What you can't do is put your hands on your hips and say, well, you really need to do it my way. You can't do that. Paul says we are free. In fact, if you go to Galatians, he's looking at the Galatian church and they're starting to get bound up in law again. They're starting to say we've got to do things a certain way to be right with God. And he says, you guys, you missed the point. You're observing special days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that somehow I've wasted my efforts on you. So no. You don't go back to the Old Testament law. That's done with. Not the Ten Commandments are gone. The law now, love God, love your neighbour. That's it. It's pretty simple. And be led by the Spirit. Different. You don't need those rules if you're led by the Spirit. So I want to give you a couple of ways to look at this idea of rest. First thing I want to get past, though, is this whole idea of dumb rules and finger waving. Because I just remember as a kid growing up, this thing going on. You shouldn't be doing that on the Sabbath. You shouldn't be doing... Jesus hated dumb rules. He hated the idea that you couldn't heal a person on the Sabbath. What a dumb rule, he says. It's why he did so many dodgy things on the Sabbath. It's why he healed people, why his disciples picked grains of corn, because he was saying, this is stupid. You guys really need to have a look at your system and what you got set up. I remember when we moved house from Les Murdy up to Butler, and I had to go and pick up some tiles. And I went into the showroom, the tile place, and I'd paid for the first batch. I'd paid the deposit over the phone with my credit card. And I went in to pay for the rest, and I realised I left my credit card back in Les Murdy, and we were now in Joondalup. And it was pre-phones, all right, pre-mobile phones. Oh, no, what am I doing? Pre-NF, what do you call it, near field, that stuff. Anyway, they said, you can't, you have to go back and get your credit card because if you can't pay for them, you can't take them. I said, I rang you before and I paid for them on the phone. He said, we can only do credit card over the phone. We can't do it without the card in person. So I picked up one of their cards and I started doing this. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm ringing you. Because you'll take my payment over the phone, but you won't take it if I just happen to have memorised my number, will you? He said, okay, that's dumb, isn't it? I said, I think it's really dumb. Right? That's a dumb rule. We have some dumb rules that we have around us. So Jesus hated dumb rules, especially this dumb rule that bound people up on the Sabbath. So he would continually break it. There is a danger of keeping Sabbath so religiously that we either feel exhausted or proud, and neither one is good. Sabbath is a gift. It's a gift from our God. He says, hey, have a rest and enjoy your rest. So if we don't follow the literal Jewish script, how do you take a Sabbath? There's a woman called Marva Dawn who's written a book called Keeping the Sabbath Holy, Wholly. And her advice is this: work out what work is for you and don't do it. All right? Figure out what work is for you and don't do it. It's pretty simple. I mean, if you work a job, it's really easy. But if you do what I used to do, just to do irrigation. And my wife loved gardening, so she would want me to sometimes get out and help her in the garden. For me, gardening is work. I don't do that on weekends. She does it for fun. I did it for money, and I didn't want to do it on the weekend. What is work for you? It's going to differ for all of us. Figure out what it is, put it down, don't do it. So, let me look at some lenses through which to view Sabbath. The first one is this. It's called Sabbath as resistance. Now, this is not my idea. I've stolen this from an Old Testament scholar called Walter Brueggemann, who wrote a book by that title. And I'm going to read you quite a long quote. But Sabbath is a way of making a countercultural statement to a world that is driven by the desire to work and earn more and get bigger and get better. Brueggemann says this. Let me take a drink. See if you can follow with me. In our contemporary context of the rat race of anxiety, the celebration of Sabbath is an act of both resistance and alternative. It is resistance because it is a visible insistence that our lives are not defined by the production and consumption of commodity goods. Such an act of resistance requires enormous intentionality and communal reinforcement amid the barrage of seductive pressures from the insatiable insistencies of the market with its intrusions into every part of our life, from the family to the national budget. But Sabbath is not only resistance, it is alternative. The alternative on offer is the awareness and practice of the claim that we are situated on the receiving end of the gifts of God. Pretty wordy, but what he's saying is Sabbath is a different way to live. It's pushing back against a world that says you need to work every waking moment you've got, because the more you work, the more you earn. And it's saying it's alternative because that's one way to live, but here is another way to live, which is trusting God and trusting that he will provide. Brueggemann says we are ruled by a pharaoh, which is the economic system we inhabit. There's a guy called Paul Kingsnorth has written a book recently, that just this year, called Against the Machine. He argues a similar thing. He'd say, we are part of this machine. We're part of this whole system, and we're caught up in it. So it's actually really hard if we're not intentional, if we're not really thinking about the way in which the world works, we'll just get swept along in its wake, and we'll just work our tails off and forget to take a day off. If you've got your own business, you'd probably know that every week you're going to get 3 or 4 calls from people who want to help you improve your business. I get these calls, usually from a landline in Sydney or Melbourne or something like that, and I pick it up and it's a foreign voice. And they say, are you the business owner? I'll say, no, he's actually in jail, which usually ends the call pretty quickly. But if I choose to listen for a while, okay, choose to listen, they start this spiel So, hey, I'm calling from Google affiliate, and we want to help you do your business. We've noticed you aren't ranking highly on Google. We want to help you rank higher, because if you rank higher, you'll get more business, and if you get more business, you'll get more work. And they go through this whole pitch, and they, okay, would you like to sign up? I said, actually, I think I've got enough work and enough money. Pretty happy with where I'm at. Now, there's no script for that. They got a script for if you say no, but enough, they don't get enough. I literally have had this conversation with a guy for quite a while where he goes, but don't you want a bigger house and a better car and a boat? And I probably do, but I'm going to try and choose to be content with enough. And that is quite a resistance type posture. It's quite an alternative to the script that we have, because his script is designed to make me want more. The world is shaped as it is, but we can say enough. We need to say enough, because that will be one of the ways in which we as Christian people are distinctive from the world around us, because we're not continually trying to get more. That will look odd, and people will say, why? Why do you still live in that same 3x1 that you bought when you were married? Why would you do that? You don't have to do that, but you can if you choose to. Maybe some of us need to restrain our ambition. Second way, Sabbath as trust. If you remember, in the Old Testament, when the Hebrew people were in the desert, God provided for them through manna and through quail. And he said, go out each day and there'll be enough for the day. Just gather enough for the day. Don't gather too much, because if you gather too much, it'll go off. There'll be more tomorrow. Don't worry. And he said, and when the Sabbath comes, don't go out at all. Gather twice as much on the day before, because that'll look after the Sabbath. And the day after, there'll be more. And you know what people did, right? They went, we need more, because we might run out. And then on the Sabbath, they went out anyway and went, what's going on? There's nothing here. And he's just saying, trust me. I will look after you. I will take care of you. If you rest and don't work, you will still have work the following week. There will still be money coming in the following week. Our God is good at looking after us. You know, we sang that song today about the goodness of God. And it says, I have lived in the goodness of God. Now, I'm 62 years old. And when I sing that song, I go, that is what I've experienced my whole life. I go, I have experienced the goodness of God. Some of you older people probably agree. You go, yes, I know what you're talking about. Now, if you're younger, you might be going, okay, I'm looking forward to experiencing more of the goodness of God. Experience a bit of it, but when you've lived in the goodness of God, you know that he will provide for you. He will care for you no matter what. Our God will always provide enough. You know, Paul writes to Timothy and he says, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. We won't. Let's be honest. Because we all still desire things. I went surfing with a couple of guys a few weeks back, and I was out on my longboard, and these guys were on these things called e-foils, electronic foils. You know when they get up on a wake and they got power, and I'm watching them just surf in and out continually, and I'm thinking, I need one of those. I really need. So I've started a conversation with my other half about getting one of those. Very few people do it, because there's the barrier to entry. Well, there's about 8,000 or 10,000 barriers to entry, all right? But we're talking about it because I want one of those. That's in us, isn't it? We naturally want stuff. We want to be content, but we've got to be aware that we also have those desires within us. Thirdly, Sabbath as rhythm. We can view Sabbath as a rhythm of our life. You know, I used to drive old cars, and I would just fix them when they broke. So I'd get 60 series Land Cruisers. They were my favourite. And inevitably seals would go, and gaskets would leak and I'd be fixing stuff all the time. And eventually I got sick of it and I bought a brand new car. And wow, that's a different experience. And now what I do is every 15,000 kilometres, my car gets serviced. My car gets looked after. Now imagine I bought that car and I'd driven it 300,000 k's without a service and I had it on Marketplace and you're looking at it and you found that out. You would not touch that. The barge pole, no way you'd come near it because you know that thing is about to blow up badly. All right? We do it with our cars. We need to develop a similar kind of rhythm with our lives. It's a matter of common sense. So for me, when I think about Sabbath, I don't think about it as a day any longer. I think about it as a rhythm of life that I get into. And I try to set aside. When I was, actually, let me go back. When we were really busy, when we were pastors and we were working as well, and we had young children, we go, no, we actually really need a day that we dedicate to taking some time out. Because when you're super busy, you really got to cut time aside. I'm not super busy now. I use the word semi-retired because people understand that. I run a small business and it's seasonal. I'm busy over winter, but not so busy in summer. So I live now with a rhythm of saying, okay, I'm going to work hard for a bit and then I'm going to back off. But I know I'm going to rest. And it's important to get that. And some of you need to take that as your way of doing things because you're shift workers. Maybe you're nurses or doctors. Maybe you work, maybe you're a FIFO, maybe you're a train driver. But all those kind of things that require you to work at odd hours and maybe different kinds of shifts, you need to be able to go, well, I need a rest. How do I work that out? It's a rhythm, not a day. So 6-to-1 is a pretty good ratio. Not 6 weeks on, 1 week off. That's a pretty dodgy ratio. But you need to work around the 6-to-1 type scenario. And you need to feel like you've rested. When you've taken a day off or taken some time out, you need to actually know that you have put your tools down and you have stopped. If you are a small business owner, you'll know that the phone rings at crazy times. People ring at stupid o'clock just about their problems. And they want you to answer the phone at 9 o'clock at night. And sometimes when it's a Sunday, I had a policy of not answering the phone on a Sunday. When it's a Sunday and the phone rings and it rings repeatedly, and you're thinking, there is business I'm not getting, you've just got to let it go and enjoy the rest, turn the phone off, let it go, and trust that the good God is actually going to provide for you with other business as it comes along. The final way to look at this is Sabbath as life. So it becomes a posture of your life, a restful life rather than a busy life. Who wouldn't like a restful life? Doesn't mean you don't work hard, but it does mean you're not swamped and you're not overrun with things to do. Hebrews 4 is a pretty complex piece of scripture, but essentially it speaks of entering into rest in Jesus. It says this: there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. So when Jesus says, come to me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls, he's speaking of a life centred on him, where we are no longer burdened either by religious obligations or by striving for any kind of success. Jesus calls us to live in his rest as a way of life, to know that he is good, he looks after us, he provides for us, and that is rich and beautiful. A few years back, I was going to the annual Baptist Pastors Conference, and the guys who were putting it on were making a little video of how different pastors practice spiritual disciplines, if you like. The theme of the conference was returning to the well. You get the idea, returning to the well, returning to Jesus, returning to spend time with him. And they come up to interview me and they asked me the question, so Andrew, how do you return to the well? And how do I say this humbly? I said one of the most incredible things I've ever said. I didn't think about it, but as I said it, I thought, that is so cool. I said, oh, we don't actually return to the well anymore. We try to live by the well. And as I said that, I thought, oh, that's good. That's good. Rather than moving away from the well and working your tail off and coming back for a bit of sustenance, you live by the well so that everything you do is sustained by that person of Jesus. That was a moment of revelation for me. I thought, I said it, I thought, yeah, we do that, but I actually want to intentionally do that more. I want to intentionally make that a way of life. So when we work and live from a place of rest, we know that Jesus does not mean that we go flat out 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 6 days a week and then we go, and then we do it again. That's not what he's got in mind, all right? It's like the people who fast only to binge eat the day after, you know? You're kind of missing the point. The point is to completely reconfigure the shape of our lives in light of who Jesus is and what he calls us to, so that we live spaciously and thoughtfully and generously in this life. That'll mean times of intense work and focus, but it'll probably mean times of real calm and rest as well. It means that sometimes the rest and work line might get blurred. Sometimes you go, I'm taking a day off, and the phone rings and you actually need to take that call. Jesus did this. You know, Jesus went across the lake to get away from all those people, pulled up on the other side of the lake, and someone had got word of the fact that he was over there. And when he got there, they were there, and he went, okay, I guess we're still working. He went away for a rest, and he actually worked. Jesus did that. So it's not something to get legalistic about. You get it? It's something to embrace and to make part of our life, but to accept that it's not going to go perfectly. It's not going to go beautifully every day. Jesus did that. Jesus didn't draw hard lines, but he had a practice of engagement and withdrawal. So to wrap up, 4 weeks on rest. First week was enjoy your work because God created you to work. Whether you're paid, whether you are retired, whatever you're doing something purposeful that serves the world. Make sure you get on and do that. We talked about vocation, who God made you to be specifically. Who has he made you to be, and what does that look like in the community you're a part of? We talked about living out your faith graciously and humbly in your workplace. Not being this person trying to convert everybody. That doesn't work in the workplace. Live it out. Make people ask questions. And finally, to prioritise rest. If you haven't been doing that, then let me give you permission to go, we need to go home and have a conversation about how we rest better. All right? Do that. Figure it out and go, we are actually going to set aside some time to really rest and do that well. Someone once said, it's better to burn out than it is to rust. But you know, those aren't the only two options on the table. There are better ways to live. Let me pray. Father, I thank you for this community of people who come together each Sunday to worship you and to be the people of God in Thornlie. And I pray for them now as they go back out again into their workplaces and into the communities in which they live. We're aware that we're here for an hour of the week and then we go out and we're shaped by so many other cultural forces. I want to pray your Spirit will be with us, helping us to think and helping us to live in such a way that we honour you and that we communicate to the people around us who you are and the kind of life you've called us to. We pray in your name. Amen.